Hello everyone, it's Glamnicism. So today I'm going to be sharing with you some of the tips and tricks which I use to draw dynamic poses. Alright, so first one. This is not certainly a dynamic pose because as you can see it's completely aligned to the balance line, which is the line that just divides the figure in half, running from the center of the neck to the floor. So the boxes are completely aligned with the balance line, as I said, which means there's no movement whatsoever. There's nothing wrong with this pose. It depends on the projects you are working on. But today I'm just going to be sharing, the tips for the dynamic poses. Let's start with the first tip. So whenever I start to draw, I never freehand my figure. I always draw a little bit of a hint of the boxes. What are the boxes? The boxes are the torso and the hips, and the first box is aligned with the collarbones at the top and the rib cage at the bottom, as the second box corresponds to the hip bone, and the top corners are basically the corners of the bones that we have in our hips, that it's kind of like butterfly shaped, as you can see. Okay, we saw a basic tilt. To make sure that my figure is like super dynamic, I really exaggerate the tilt within the torso and the hips. And it's very important for you to understand something, because I saw many students over the years and they're very scared about this distance that runs within the torso and the hips. So they try to connect the hips with the torso, and then the movement just doesn't happen. So I'll show you what to do. So you don't have to be afraid of the distance. You just need to draw the box as it is. So parallel lines, trapeze shape. Now I'm just like quickly finishing the wall pose. And basically you'll see that the torso and the hips are just joined by a soft curve, which is basically the belly. So nothing to be scared about. You don't need to try to connect the boxes. Just draw them tilted as they are, and you will see that a figure that has this kind of tilt, it's very dynamic. So once again, quickly finishing my croquis. Alright, and as you can see, when I put my real figure behind, everything is completely fine. Okay, I'm also outlining the boxes again with a black pencil, just to remind you that also you don't need to distort the distance within the two lines. So no weird shapes, always keep the trapeze shapes regular, because they really help you to keep the the proportions right. Another trick that I use a lot are diagonals. So I always make sure that my head goes into one direction, my torso goes in the opposite one, my hip goes in the opposite one once again, and my legs too. And doing so, I really provide a sense of like movement, even in a pose that it's not jumping, not walking, but with the simple trick, it looks like very dynamic. Another very important trick that I use a lot is twists. So not only diagonals are important, but also I always make sure that if the head looks into a certain direction, the shoulders are twisted in the opposite direction, and the hips is twisted again in the opposite direction, and the foot as well. And doing so, once again, you have a very dynamic effect, as you can see. Now I'll quickly draw the pose for you to see what's happening. Alright, let's now move to walking poses. So a walking pose is supposed to be dynamic because it's moving, but not every walking pose is very dynamic. Sometimes you draw a figure that's walking and it's not very dynamic and you don't understand why. So I always make sure that the my walking figures have a very, very emphasized action line. So the action line, as you can see here, is this S curve line that runs from the center of the neck down to the supporting leg, which is the leg that supports the weight. You can look my previous tutorial to know a little bit more about this kind of lines. So as you can see here, the S curve is very, very little, as opposed to this other example over here, where the curve is super, super accentuated. And this is pretty much what I do with every one of my walking poses. I really accentuate the curve a lot to make sure that the tilt is extreme and that the figure looks very dynamic. In this pose, it's very, very interesting because a little bit of everything that we already saw kind of shows, like the tilt, the diagonals, and that's why this pace, it's like super, super fierce, and the pose, it's very, very nice. Okay, now I'll quickly finish it for you to see. All right, so last but not least, what I really take care about is muscles definition. So if you don't draw the different, muscle shapes, your figures are always going to be ending up very flat and very stiff. So I always make sure that in mine, I kind of like accentuate what happens on a muscular, level. As you can see here, I'm just drawing the arms and the legs with simple parallel lines, and nothing nice is really happening. Look instead here what will happen on the right side, where I will properly define the muscles. So here I'm really, really accentuating them just for you to understand their shape. So basically on the right side we have two parentheses, and on the left side we have a first line which is a sort of a curve, and then another line which is bumpy at first and then runs kind of straight. So that's the first part of the leg, and then the second part is like this. It would be really too hard to explain the muscles in such a short tutorial, but I really recommend you to go through, anatomy books and make sure that you learn some more about it in the different views, profile views, back views, three-quarter views, just to understand what happens to legs and arms in whichever, angle you want to draw your pose. So as you can see over here, drawing the proper muscle structure makes a huge difference. Now I'm refining the figure a little bit better for you to see this difference. Alright, so I'm now going to define all of the previous croquis for you to see the definitive result. I'm also going to be adding a little bit of elongation. So basically these are the main go-to for me when I draw dynamic poses: the boxes, the tilt, diagonals, twists, curves, and muscular definition. Of course, there's many other ways to increase the dynamic aspects of your croquis, but these are, just a few of the basic ones. Then there's like color contrast, there's shape interpretation, there's, proportion interpretation, but for now, it's just a start. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you soon on Glamnicism. Bye!